Full disclosure, I haven't even finished going through the NIO earnings transcript. I actually got a little too excited and started recording because I wanted to share some of what I was thinking. So I'll do that. But my single biggest takeaway from this earnings that NIO just had, and this is March 6th, 2024. As I record this, it's in the afternoon, just to give you a date and timestamp on this. My biggest takeaway was I think that companies like Apple and BYD and Tesla and Ford would benefit greatly from partnering with NIO in the future. More on that in just a second. And I'm not just trying to hype or say, oh, I think this is going to happen. I have no idea if it will happen, but I'll explain why it would make a lot of sense for them in just a minute. First of all, at the bottom of the screen on the ticker, these were the four things that I kind of identified that I was watching heading into this earnings. Now, the first one, the profitability teaser, this is specifically tied to one analyst, and she is the only analyst in the last earnings call who recognized NIO is actually kind of flirting with profitability. So let's pull her up. And this is one of the questions she asked. I was wondering if she would follow up with a similar question. But then as I read her questions and then William Lee's responses, I realized there's no reason for her to ask what she can easily verify and validate for herself now, because they've already told her basically from the last earnings call what was in play. She can see it now. So why waste her questions on that? So I like that she asked about value proposition and things like the sub brands versus the main brand and pricing and what NIO's strategies are with respect to that. But this is the part that kind of ties into the partnerships. And it's just a piece of it because further, I think it was later on, there was another question from an analyst. Again, sorry, I haven't completely gone through this yet, but it just got me going, wow, okay, I'm seeing this getting even bigger than I thought before. And that's because I think I see some of the dots that William Lee has out there that I think eventually will get connected, and it's going to make this company much bigger than I ever thought. And it's already bigger and heading in that direction of being bigger than I initially thought it was going to be. So, wow, kind of blew me away. And that's why I just was like, okay, I've got to record and share some of this and what I think I'm seeing. So his response, William Lee's response to one of her questions was, and this is about the competition in China. He says, we believe that by the end of the day, those companies with good overall capabilities and competence, as well as those companies who care about the experience of the end users, will survive from the fierce competition. And we are confident that we will withstand such competition from all the competitors. All right, I like this. It was very subtle and very quiet, but this is a point of strength for him to be stating, basically, we're not worried about anyone. Now, this is a different feel that I get from this verbiage and the wording and the presentation that he gave here, even though it was kind of subtle. Sorry, back to his comments. He says, but in the meantime, so again, now we're back to the present. He's seeing the future as it develops, and the rest of us are kind of catching up, trying to see, what he sees. In the meantime, he says, we also see cooperation out of the competition. That's important. For example, he says, we have announced power swap cooperation with many car companies. Chang'an Automobile is the first car company to partner with NIO in power swap. Later, we also collaborated with Geely Holding, JAC Group, and Cherry on the battery swap. We also have partnerships with energy companies like Sinopec and PetroChina for the construction of power swap stations, as well as with China Southern Power Grid on the energy storage, as well as power swap stations. So in general, NIO is pretty good at partnering up with the peers in the industry. Since the competition is inevitable, we would like to look at how we can navigate through the intense competition from the reasonability of the business perspective. Okay, now let me bring this up again. So let's say Apple, company that spent a lot of years looking into maybe developing their own smart car and ultimately have sort of announced recently they're not going to do one. And there had been some hype and some rumors about NIO and Apple partnering before. I think the key point, there are kind of a couple of them that may come into play if these two would partner. And I'm not saying I expect it. I'm just saying it would make sense for a company like Apple to partner with NIO because it would allow them to use their branding and their strength of branding and the name that they have in some markets to basically diversify and get into another space. And the benefit of working with NIO is you not only have the smart EV play and the technology potential, but also the energy play. How about now let's come back and let's talk Tesla briefly. Tesla, I would say if there's one knock that I would have on Tesla, it's the value of the car deteriorating over time because it doesn't have a swappable battery. But there's no reason they couldn't partner with NIO in the future and do swappable batteries. And then now they also get exposure to another new market if they want to become part of this energy play with power swap station infrastructure build out, that sort of thing. Again, now you've got a brand that would be able to better capitalize and leverage off of its existing brand strength. BYD, and this is maybe the most fascinating one. And I had said before that I was hoping NIO's cheapest, the sub brand that we should hear about in 2025, maybe being released in 2025. I was hoping that BYD was going to be NIO's partner on that. And the reason I was hoping that is BYD has proven the ability to scale in an incredibly massive way, especially on the lower end vehicles. And so I thought that would really help NIO with numbers on those lower end, priced sub brands. But we'll see. I don't know. I could see them also recognizing the value or the leverage of an energy partnership with PowerSwap. So again, that's just something that I'm not counting on any of these things, but it makes more sense for me. And it's funny, part of why I'm thinking this and just sharing this, and I'm just kind of call it a rant if you want. I'm just sharing some of my thoughts because in the comment section, I've seen it over and over, even NIO bulls who are kind of like, oh yeah, BYD or Tesla or somebody should buy NIO. I've never wanted that. The reason I chose this company, a big part of it is the guy running the company and his vision. And I thought his vision was bigger and more beneficial from the global standpoint, and business wise, that made the most sense to me. So I wouldn't want him to sell. I do like the idea that he's talking about and has already recognized and has already successfully leveraged partnerships. And we're going to see some of that continue with the UAE and that recent partnership that NIO has, especially as they're going to be doing business there in the Middle East now. So, this is a very interesting time. I'll mention Ford, and this is kind of the one we talked a little bit about this before. Ford has done some things with NIO. Jim Farley has talked very glowingly and positively about NIO. But Ford and NIO, if they would do a partnership, that might be a way for NIO to get into the US market on the manufacturing side. Another play could be if we see, and I'm kind of watching this, BYD or someone else, even if it's not NIO, doing a factory in Mexico. Now they're on the North American continent. I know there are ways I think that you can work around some of right now it seems kind of loud and noisy and a lot of political stuff going on. But, this is the US. Politics is huge money. And so there's always going to be some noise, I think. And so I don't get too hung up in those things. But I am kind of just sitting back watching to see what happens. And ultimately, let's face it, if let's say the US doesn't ever allow any Chinese manufacturers or vehicle makers to come into the US with their smart EVs. Let's say that happens. You know how many sales NIO is getting in the US right now? None. Some of the other questions that have come up in this earnings and his response, William Lee's response to them, especially as the sub brands come out and as NIO is now solidifying itself with these partnerships across the energy sector and also within the EV space, but that battery swap, what better way to maintain value in the vehicle over the course of time than if you have the optionality of battery swap? It's just a no-brainer for any of these companies that want to establish the longevity and not have the issue of, well, the battery's bad, now the car's trash. It's worth nothing now. It's no longer an investment. It's just something that, at some point in time, whatever time the battery is so old or dies, the whole thing is the shell, everything is dead. That's not very sustainable, I guess, if you want to look at it, talk about it in those terms. But now, sorry, let me get back to, and I'll briefly finish because this isn't going to take long. I've seen it already, and I just chuckle whenever I see the whole cash burn thing, that phrase thrown around. And this ties in with the margins and the other revenues. But ultimately, the balance sheet kind of tells the story here. It's really simple. And so I've got this highlighted. This is the third quarter. I've been watching this for several years now. Cash and cash equivalents. This is the end of the third quarter. So this was, I think, September when they reported this. And NIO had $6.2 billion on the balance sheet at the end of September in 2023. Okay. So for the one they just reported on, which was the end of the fourth quarter, December 31st, they had 8.1 billion US dollars. Okay. This is trending in the right direction. NIO trending. I didn't do that. That kind of happened accidentally. That was not intentional, but it's still very, very early. And the positioning of NIO, and think about this, even if some countries don't allow Chinese EVs or NIO, let's say, to come into their country, there are other countries that will, and it'll make a lot more sense for NIO to have two lower price sub brand options where they can also offer an energy play. Each time I hear William Lee talk, it feels like I'm just kind of like my brain gets open a little more and I'm like, okay, this company can be even bigger. I already thought it was going to grow into and was starting to become a global giant. But now as I think about how many different countries and the entry point, that'll be so much easier with lower priced vehicles, and they have the energy play. It just, I think the companies that are smart, that want to leverage, would be intelligent to consider partnering with NIO, whether it's Apple, whether it's Tesla, whether it's BYD, Ford. Those are the ones that obviously I think they're relatable enough that it would be it would just make a lot of sense. Doesn't mean they're going to do any of that, but it's sort of more the way I'm going to be thinking is let's see what other partnerships take shape here over, the next few years. And of course, let's see what happens when NIO does come out with their sub brands and just how well those are received. If there's one thing that I would say is a bit of a negative, or that I was hoping we would see more of an advancement by NIO, it's the rural model is what I've called it before. And that is the expansion into the lower tier, the smaller cities in China. But I think also NIO recognized they need to establish more power swap stations to build out that infrastructure, because that's a great selling point within those sort of smaller areas or smaller cities. So, it's one of those things. Again, it's sort of like the delivery numbers, in the shorter term, maybe it's slowed their growth, but the bigger picture potential, especially with the energy play and NIO Power and the way that is coming together and taking shape, that energy play is just, it's enormous, I think. And so, but the flip side of being innovative and disruptive is you're going to have the noise. You're going to have the people who are going to not want to embrace or recognize or understand the advancements of the technology and what is there. Having been away from the world for most of a decade and no internet during that time, coming back and seeing the changes, I get it. Change is not always an easy thing to accept or recognize, and so or embrace. So let's see what happens. It's still very early. I got to stop talking. I'm sorry. I got a little. I was kind of excited, but it was more just kind of like, wow, light bulb and more dots out there, and the global potential for the company is even greater than I ever thought. And so I'm just curious, what of these companies will be smart enough to see the value in partnering with NIO? Yeah, crazy. Anyway, drop it in the comments. Thanks. I'll be back with more content before you know it. Have a great day. We'll see y'all again very soon.